Kids these days have it so much easier. They have it so much better. Back in my day, I used to have to walk uphill both ways to and from school, and then when I got home, I had to clean the streets with my tongue. That's right, you've probably heard your dad, your parents, dumb dad jokes about how things used to be and how things are so much easier today. Well, when it comes to pro wrestling video games, things are definitely not better than they were. Sure, we get the mobile games and then we get the 2K series, but back in the day, there was a whole gaggle of games. There was games on every console, multiple consoles. They were spawning every type of genre from fighting to turn-based games. There's a whole list of them. But today, we are going to look at some of those lesser-known video games. Now, I did go and look at some of those canceled games, some of those games that never actually came out, and if you want to check out that video, it's on my channel. Today, we're going to look at some obscure pro wrestling video games, and I'm going to stick to the North America market. I'm not going to go over to Japan or the UK because, quite frankly, those games weren't something that I actually experienced. So today, we're going to look at North America, obscure pro wrestling video games, and we're going to look at the top 5 favorite ones of mine. The first one on my list you've probably seen before because I've actually played it on my channel. We're looking at the beat-em-up WWF Betrayal for the Game Boy Color. Now this game is based on the 1999 storyline with Stephanie McMahon getting kidnapped. Vince McMahon promises you a WWF Championship match if you manage to save her. Now you have a choice to play as Stone Cold Steve Austin, The Rock, Triple H, or The Undertaker. This game was mixed reviews and it didn't do very well, and it was the last game actually released on the Game Boy Color. I have a soft spot in my heart for this game because it is something from the norm. You go around through different types of beat-em-up style matches where you're going to fight anything from a construction guy to a stagehand to referees, beating them up all the way to try and get Stephanie McMahon back to Vince McMahon. Obviously, there's going to be a huge plot twist when you get through the storyline, and I won't spoil it in case you've never played it, but WWF Betrayal for the Game Boy Color is definitely a game that you want to get. It's not obscure as the number one game is, but it's still one of those games that not a lot of people have actually heard of. So if you've never played WWF Betrayal, go to your local game shop, go to a local game trade shop, not GameStop because they probably don't have it, somewhere that carries Game Boy Color games, and try and get WWF Betrayal. Before WWE Supercard came out, there was a game called WWF With Authority. It was changed to WWE With Authority when the World Wildlife Fund sued the WWE. Now, at its core, this was a collectible card game. It's similar to the way that WWE Supercard is, except it was a little bit different. Instead of getting a group of superstars, you would just choose one superstar, and then you would pick moves based off of that. You started off with a basic deck, and as you went along, you could get different expansion sets as they went along. They had a first edition, No Way Out, WrestleMania 18, TLC second edition, SummerSlam, Unforgiven, and Expansion 8. Now, you could also, if you wanted to, you could trade cards with different players online, or you could do it on eBay or things like that, just to get those cards off and then get new cards in there. There was a single-player offline mode, but that was pretty much just a tutorial, and you only really had one player to play as and then one person to go against as a tutorial level. The main focus was online multiplayer, and there was at least 1,000 people available at any given time during the height of the popularity. This game took a great deal of success by keeping track of wins, losses, and draws, as well as the number of times you've been disconnected during the middle of a match. That way, you couldn't actually just quit the game and avoid a loss. Now, as I said, this game would have been a success, but I believe the problem was the collectible card game genre didn't really flourish yet. Magic the Gathering was around, but the online version of Magic the Gathering wasn't really seen till after this game had already come out. I think that if today this game was released, it would be a success, but there's no reason for them to release it today because they have WWE Supercard. WWE With Authority was a very, very good game, but unfortunately, it only lasted a few years. Nothing makes a game more obscure than being released on an obscure console. The N-Gage was an obscure console. It was developed to be a smartphone and a handheld game system by Nokia. The N-Gage attempted to lure gamers away from the Game Boy Advance by including mobile phone functionality. The problem is that this wasn't a very good phone, and it wasn't a very good gaming console because all the buttons were designed for a phone. One of the major flaws of the gaming aspect of this handheld was that to insert a game, you literally had to remove the plastic cover and remove the battery to put the game in the slot. Now, this was addressed in a later version and a re-release of the console, but it was just a bad design flaw right off the bat. Now let's talk about WWE Aftershock itself, the game. We need to talk about the console a little bit more because the handheld was a mobile phone, so playing games on it wasn't very friendly, and the screen was very weird. Most of them are used to playing in a box, but this was more of like a rectangle because you had it taller than it was wide. So instead of having that 4:3 ratio, we had like 11:13, and it was just a very, very odd feel for gaming. Now, the character models weren't very good, and they had that knife hand thing going on. So when you would do moves like the 5-knuckle shuffle, you would actually slice them with your hand, and it just looked very weird. They had single-player, multiplayer, and some online mode for the N-Gage. But unfortunately, because the N-Gage was such a poor console, poor handheld, poor phone, whatever you want to call it, this game never really took off. I think that this game was a nice attempt at a wrestling game, but it wasn't a good attempt. I think they wanted to get a game on the N-Gage, hoping that the N-Gage would take off, but because of poor sales, the N-Gage didn't last very long, and WWE Aftershock was gone. Get a headlock on fun with Howl Wrestling. 8 romping, stomping brutes square off head-to-head matches any sport fan can enjoy. All the pro wrestling moves you can use and a few you haven't seen before. Go one-on-one against a computer or a friend, or round up your own 4-man wrecking crew for thunderous action. Howl Wrestling, we're coming to get ya. Who's Howl? What is Howl? Howl is the company that created it. Howl America Incorporated, bringing you Howl Wrestling on the Game Boy. Now, we know that the Game Boy produced some of the worst pro wrestling games of all time, but Howl Wrestling is the best of the bunch. If you like pro wrestling on the NES, you're going to love this because this is done in a very similar style. The one complaint I do have about this game is that it is very generic. The background music gets repetitive, and it's just sort of a generic wrestling game. The characters aren't over the top. They went for more realistic, and it just plays like a generic wrestling game. The one thing that you will note that is a plus out of this game is that there are a lot of unique moves. Each wrestler has its own moveset, and they all feel like they are different characters. Howl Wrestling is a very, very good game, which lets you have one-on-one matches or 4-on-4. That's all you have. Again, Howl Wrestling is the best of the bunch, but Game Boy Wrestling, I would probably just stay away from it. And my top most favorite obscure pro wrestling game has to be the TNA iPhone game. And no, I am not talking about the one featuring Hulk Hogan and that stupid Namco Bandai one. No. That's not the one I'm talking about. I'm talking about the 2009 TNA iPhone video game. Now, unfortunately, because the company went out of business, they no longer have the game available on the iTunes store. It really, really, really sucks, and I wish the company that made the game didn't go out of business because we would still be able to play that game. Now, first off, you'll notice that this is very different than any pro wrestling game that you've ever played on your phone. This is a turn-based game. You start off by creating your wrestler, and as you see, it's got very nice pixel graphics, which is one of the things that I really loved about this. You create your wrestler and you go through storylines, and as you progress on the storylines, you earn more moves, you earn experience, and you can actually progress to try and do different storylines. One of the cool storylines is that you can try and get a date with a TNA knockout. Now, the gameplay is very, very different. As I said, it is turn-based wrestling. You have a basic set of moves as you start the game, but as you progress on, you learn more moves. The moves are done by doing different motions with your fingers. Like one of the moves you have to do is a circle, and if you complete the circle, then you do the move. Again, you do a move, they do a move, you have life bars, and it's very, very fun. Again, this game is no longer available on the iTunes store, and it really, really sucks that it's not, because if I would have known that, I wouldn't have deleted it off of my iPod Touch. Unfortunately, this game is no longer around. Now let me know what you think of these obscure pro wrestling video games. Was I right in my list, or did some of these games kind of suck? Also, what games did I forget to put on my list that you may remember? Anyway, guys, let your thoughts be heard in the comment section below. If you're new to the channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button. And if you enjoy this content, make sure you hit the like button. If you have any suggestions for future videos, let me know in the comment section below as well. As always, Tony Beats Guy, 2 Sweet!